Today we're going to talk about the digestive system. This is chapter 24. The digestive system consists of a muscular tube, and we call this muscular tube different names. You'll hear it called the digestive tract. You'll hear it called the GI tract or gastrointestinal tract. You might hear it called the alimentary tract or the alimentary canal. So it includes this muscular tract, and it also includes accessory structures. Accessory structures include things like salivary glands, teeth, the gallbladder, liver, pancreas. So let's look at the digestive tract. And the digestive tract starts in the mouth. And the mouth we call the oral cavity. So the layman's term for that is the mouth. Now that leads into the throat, which is the pharynx. And the pharynx leads into the esophagus. So this esophagus is basically your food tube. And the esophagus leads into the stomach. And the stomach leads into the small intestine. And the small intestine leads into the large intestine. The accessory structures with the teeth, the tongue, the salivary glands, they are all associated with the oral cavity. And then we have the gallbladder and the liver and the pancreas. And they're all associated with the small intestine because their secretions are going to go into the small intestine. The digestive functions are as follows. So first of all, we have ingestion. So ingestion is bringing things into the mouth. So food enters the digestive tract through the mouth. Second, we have mechanical processing. This is the physical manipulation in the mouth and the digestive tract. So it's just your teeth and your tongues are, grinding and mashing away at the food, and then your intestines and your stomach, they can also squeeze and mash and mix food. That's all called mechanical processing. Then we also have digestion. Digestion refers to chemical digestion. So it's not the mechanical process of breaking down, physically breaking down through mashing and grinding. Instead, it's a chemical breakdown of nutrients. So you're breaking down, using chemicals to break down food into smaller and smaller and smaller molecules until they can be absorbed into the body. Fourth, we have secretion. Secretion is when things from the blood are released into the tube, which is the digestive tract. So this is the GI tract, and this is the blood. So secretion is releasing things like water and acids, an acid like hydrogen, and enzymes, and buffers, and releasing them into the digestive tract. Then we have absorption. Absorption is the movement of these molecules, small organic molecules or electrolytes or vitamins or water or anything that you're actually ingesting. So water, vitamins, nutrients like glucose and amino acids, electrolytes like sodium, chloride, those are electrolytes. Those things are absorbed into the blood from the digestive tract, where secretion goes the exact opposite way. Secretion is basically trying to get things out of the body, whereas absorption is trying to get things into the body. And then finally, the last function we have is excretion. So when we have products in the intestine, then they will be excreted out of the body. So the difference between secretion and excretion is excretion, you're actually getting it out of the body, whereas secretion, you're getting it out of the blood and into the digestive tract. So before we go any further, I want to talk about the histology, or the histological organization of the entire digestive tract. So we're going to kind of go over an overview of what the cells and the layers look like in this digestive tract. So again, remember, the digestive tract includes the mouth or the oral cavity, the pharynx, which is the throat, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, and then at the end we've got the rectum and the anus. So we are going to look at the histology. So when we take a cross section, remember this is just one big muscular tube. So if we take a cross section and we just look at inside the tube, this here would be inside the tube. So this right here is inside the tube. And when we are looking at things inside the tube, we call it the lumen. So that's inside the lumen. And so this is where, on the inside of the lumen, this is where all the food would be, and then this was all the water. And so all of the contents are inside this lumen. So now we're going to look at the layers, and we're going to start in the very first layer, which is the deepest layer, and then we're going to work our way out. So the first layer that we have is called the mucosa. So that's this layer in here. Let's see if I can kind of show it here. So this whole layer in here, this is the mucosa all the way around, right? All the way around. That's the innermost layer. So it lines the whole digestive tract. It contains a mucous membrane. So the mucosa has an epithelial lining, right? So remember all the different types of epithelia that we have. So if we look down here, we can see that in the mouth, there's going to be a different type of epithelial lining. So in the oral cavity, the mucosa is made of a stratified squamous. Remember what that is? It's many layers of these flat cells, and it's really good for protection. So in the oral cavity in the mouth, where there's a lot of friction because of your teeth and your tongue and all the fluids and the food that we put inside the mouth, it needs a really strong epithelium. Then when we look at like the stomach, that has a different function. So that epithelia is going to be more simple columnar, and it's going to contain some mucus cells as well. So then we call it a mucosal epithelium. So it has simple columnar cells. These cells, if you remember them, there's one layer of these columnar or rectangular cells. Then if we look at the intestines, then we have, in here we have simple columnar cells, but these are called goblet cells. And in this case, again, they're going to be rectangular. So we've got these rectangular cells, which means they're going to secrete things, but they're secreting things like enzymes. In between those goblet cells, then, there are also going to be these other cells, which are called enteroendocrine cells. And these cells secrete hormones. So not only are we having getting enzymes being secreted in this intestinal area, we also have hormones that are secreted. So the mucosa just changes from one section of the digestive tract to another. Also in the mucosal area, we see plica. And so plica are these permanent transverse folds that increase the surface area available for absorption. So here we can see in here all of these folds. Those are plica. Now in the stomach, we're going to see how those folds are called rugae. So there are some variations throughout the digestive tract. Then the last thing that we see in this mucosa is called the lamina propria. So I just want to bring you to this picture here. Here's the lamina propria. So this whole area in here that we have from, here to here, this is all the mucosa on the outside of it. So basically, if I wanted to draw a line, we would be seeing from the outside here all the way. All of this is the mucosa. Okay, that's all the mucosa. So in the mucosa, we have two things. We have this outside here. That's where the epithelium is, where I have it drawn in black. And then right underneath that, in the other blue area there, that's what this lamina propria is. Okay, that's the lamina propria. Now the lamina propria is basically, it's an underlining areolar tissue. So it's a connective tissue, and it contains blood vessels and sensory nerve endings and lymphatic vessels. It contains smooth muscle cells. It contains lymphoid tissue and mucus glands. So it has a potpourri of a whole bunch of different types of things in there, but basically your blood vessels and lymphatics. There's also, within that lamina propria, like I mentioned, there's a smooth muscle, and that smooth muscle is called the muscularis mucosa. This muscularis mucosa helps to alter the shape of the lumen. So it's not primarily the smooth muscle that helps with the mechanical digestion, but it can help to alter the shape of the lumen. So I had said before that there are these circular folds that are found throughout the digestive tract. In the stomach, we call them rugae. Other places, we're going to call them plica. But they are these circular folds. And so this whole thing here that we see, this whole thing, this is one big circular fold. And on top of that, we see these other folds, right? So those other folds, those smaller folds, are called villi. Villi. Those villi help to increase the surface area even greater, because when you are taking in nutrients and water and electrolytes and vitamins, all of those things that you've ingested are in the lumen of your digestive tract. And so we need a lot of surface area for those things to get absorbed, because they're going to be absorbed into that circular fold and then into either the blood or the lymphatics on the inside of that circular fold. All right, so now let's talk about the next layer, the second layer, and that's called the submucosa. So we've got this whole layer in here. We can see it goes all the way up inside those circular folds, and it's the second layer. So this contains large blood vessels. It contains arteries and veins. It contains lymphatics and nerve fibers, sensory neurons, parasympathetic motor neurons. So it's got a lot of, basically what this submucosa has are nerves, blood vessels, and lymphatics. And we can see that the branches of these things, especially these blood vessels and lymphatics, they go up into that circular fold. So here's the artery, or little capillary that comes off of the arteriole, goes up into that circular fold, and then the capillary comes back down and then becomes a venule. So it reaches all the way up. And then we see the lymphatics. The lymphatics start at a lacteal, which is a capillary of the lymphatics, and then that comes all the way back down. So there's both blood vessels and lymphatics reaching up into that circular fold. And again, so then when you ingest things, whatever you're ingesting, whatever nutrients or vitamins, they're going to go into one of those things, either the blood vessel or into the lymphatics. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. The submucosa also contains a plexus of nerves, and this plexus of nerves is called the submucosal plexus. So this plexus is going to innervate the submucosal layer as well as the mucosal layer. It will detect any sensory information that it needs to detect, and it will also send commands to the muscularis mucosa to alter the shape of the lumen from like the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, deep to the submucosal, we have the muscular layer, and another name for the muscular layer is the muscularis externa. So this layer of the digestive tract will cause contractions that agitate and propel materials along the digestive tract. It is controlled by another nerve plexus that we call the myenteric plexus. So this myenteric plexus, which is the network of nerves, controls this agitation and propulsion. The parasympathetic nervous system is going to increase this agitation and propulsion, and the sympathetic nervous system will decrease the muscle tone and the activity of the muscular layer. Now, in this muscular layer, there's two different layers in most of the areas of the digestive tract of smooth muscle. One of the layers has its muscle cells arranged in a circular layer, whereas the other layer, those muscle cells are going to be arranged in more of a longitudinal layer. This gives two different functions to this muscular layer, and we're going to talk about the two different functions in just a couple minutes. The final layer that we have is called the serosa. The serosa is the outermost layer of the digestive tract. It covers the muscularis externa along most portions of the digestive tract. There's no serosa covering the muscularis externa of areas like the oral cavity or the pharynx or the esophagus or the rectum. But in all the other places like the stomach and the intestines, you will see the serosa. The serosa includes the mesenteries, and the mesenteries are where the parietal and visceral peritoneum are connected by double sheets of a serous membrane, and that helps to suspend the digestive tract. So basically, the mesenteries suspend the digestive tract. So let's take a look at the mesenteries next. Before we talk about the mesenteries, let's just review the peritoneum. The peritoneum is a serous membrane. It consists of two different layers. We have the visceral layer. The visceral layer surrounds each organ in the peritoneal cavity. If you remember what the peritoneal cavity is, underneath the diaphragm, we have the abdominal cavity. And then underneath the abdominal cavity, we have the pelvic cavity. And we said that the peritoneal cavity contained most of the organs in the abdominal cavity and some of the organs in the pelvic cavity. So that is your peritoneal cavity. So inside that peritoneal cavity are a lot of different organs. So the visceral layer surrounds each of the individual organs inside this peritoneal cavity. The parietal layer then, the parietal layer surrounds the outside, or it lines the cavity itself. So that's going to be this outermost lining there. Okay, that's the parietal. Then there are these other things called mesentery, and they connect the parietal with the visceral layers. So we're going to see a better picture of that in the next slide. The mesenteries connect the visceral layer and the parietal layer. You're going to look at different types of mesenteries, including the lesser and the greater omentum. You're going to look at ligaments like the falciform ligament. You'll look at mesentery proper. and you're going to look at the mesocolon. That'll be on the next slide. And then we're also going to talk about which of these things are retroperitoneal. Okay, so here's a picture, a drawing that you guys can print out if you want to. It's just showing that this right here is the lesser omentum. It's the mesentery that's connecting the stomach to the liver, kind of holding that stomach in place. Down here, and it's been cut, so you can see that the edge of that has been cut. This right here is the greater omentum. It's hanging down from the stomach, from that posterior or the inferior edge of the stomach, and it's called the greater omentum. And this is the one that ends up, it's cut, but it usually hangs low and it loops back around, and it's called the fatty apron. So when people are when they gain that abdominal weight, that's fat within on the inside of that greater omentum is where those adipose cells are stretching and growing. Then if we look down here a little lower, we see this is the mesentery proper. The mesentery proper is what's holding the small intestine in place. So you can see the fibers up here, and you can see the fibers, the red fibers down here, and they're just holding that small intestine in place. And then we can also see this right here, and that is called the mesocolon. And the mesocolon is holding the large intestine in place. So that's those blue lines there that are coming down like this. Okay, that's the mesocolon. Okay, then when we look at this picture, you'll see a picture like this in your book too. First of all, we'll look at a couple of structures here. I want you to get an idea of what we're looking at here. We're looking at the cross-section of many of the organs. So when we look at the organs here, we can see this up here. This is the liver, right? So that's a cross-section of the liver. Right here we have the stomach. Right here we have the transverse colon, so that's part of the large intestine. And then we have a whole bunch of small intestine cross sections. That's pretty long, so we can see it. And then all of those organs are inside the parietal peritoneum. So the parietal peritoneum is this blue line that I have that you can see all the way around. That is the parietal peritoneum. I'm going to do it in a little thicker, I think, here. Try to do it here. So this is the parietal peritoneum going all the way around, right? So it doesn't really, it stays on the outside of the cavity. It doesn't go inside at all, right? And then, so that is your parietal peritoneum, okay? Then in red, I have the visceral peritoneum. So now we're looking at, let's see, go a little smaller here. Okay, so now around each one of the organs, you see this red line that I've drawn in. That red line then, that is showing you what the visceral peritoneum is doing. It's covering each individual organ. So it covers it pretty closely. And then in between those, you have these green lines here, and these are those mesentery. And the mesentery connect the red and the blue lines. So it's connecting the parietal peritoneum to the visceral peritoneum. Now there's a couple of organs that we see out here that are not inside that blue lining, right? So we've got a couple here. See, that goes all the way down like that, like that. So there's a couple organs that are not inside the parietal peritoneum. This organ right here is not. That one is called the pancreas. Then we have an organ right here that is the duodenum. And then if you look a little bit lower down here, we have the uterus and the urinary bladder, and then the rectum. So all of those organs are retroperitoneal. There is a mnemonic that you can use You do need to know which organs are considered retroperitoneal. So the mnemonic is SAD, pucker. Okay, so the S stands for suprarenal glands. The suprarenal, supra means above, renal means kidney. Okay, the gland that's above the kidneys is the adrenal gland. The aorta and the inferior vena cava are retroperitoneal. The duodenum is retroperitoneal, the second and third parts. The pancreas is retroperitoneal, so is the ureters, so is the colon and the kidneys and the esophagus and the rectum. Those organs are all retroperitoneal. Let's take a look at the digestive movements of material along the digestive tract. So first of all, there are these pace setter cells. These are in the smooth muscle of the digestive tract, and they trigger waves of contractions. These are rhythmic cycles. There's two types of these different types of contractions. One is called peristalsis, and the other one is called segmentation. So in the first one, which is called peristalsis, this is where waves of muscular contractions move material along the length of the digestive tract. So if this is the digestive tract and you have a bolus of food, the contractions of the smooth muscle would occur behind this bolus of food. So it would push the bolus of food forward. By forward, I mean, it's moving from the mouth towards the anus or towards the rectum. Both the circular muscles and the longitudinal muscles are going to be contracting behind the bolus of food to move it forward. The other type of contraction that we call segmentation, what this is going to do, so here's your bolus of food here. In this, with segmentation, we get a churning and a fragmenting of the bolus. So there'll be contractions behind it and then contractions in front of it, and it just bounces this bolus of food backwards and forwards as it churns it and breaks it up, mixing the digestive contents. Let's talk about control of digestive functions. So as with everything, we have local control, we have hormonal control, and we have neural control. So throughout all of physiology, you will always see these three types of control. So first of all, let's talk about local controls. Locally, there are cells that will release substances like prostaglandins and histamine and other chemicals that are responding to the changes in the pH. So for example, histamine gets released by the lamina propria, in the stomach, that will stimulate acid secretion. It stimulates the secretion of hydrochloric acid, and that will help to break down proteins. Then we have hormonal mechanisms, and there's about 18 different hormones that are produced in the digestive tract, and these hormones are going to affect the digestive function and other systems as well. And finally, we have neural control. First of all, there are sensory receptors, or sensory neurons. Those sensory neurons are going to detect changes in the intestines or in the GI tract. So they will detect when there's contents in the GI tract and what those contents are. There's also motor neurons, and these motor neurons are located in the myenteric plexus that we talked about. And they are going to be involved in reflexes. So there's short reflexes, and the short reflexes, otherwise known as myenteric reflexes, they receive information from those sensory neurons. And they will cause contractions based on this local information that they're receiving. And then we also have long reflexes. Long reflexes involve interneurons as well as motor neurons. In the central nervous system that will provide a higher level of control over digestive and glandular activities. And these long reflexes cause large-scale peristaltic contractions. So instead of having just a local area contracting, it'll cause contractions through a much larger portion of the GI tract. I'm going to start a little bit by talking about the oral cavity. So this is the mouth. The functions of the oral cavity include analysis. So you can analyze materials that are in your mouth before you swallow them. Also in the oral cavity, mechanical processing occurs. So chewing is going to occur in the oral cavity, moving things around with your tongue. The third thing is lubrication. So there are some salivary glands that are going to release secretions. There's also mucus glands that release mucus. And together, those two things are going to lubricate the food that comes into your mouth. And then fourth, there is the beginning of carbohydrate digestion. So we'll be talking about more of that in the next video that we have. There are these enzymes that are called salivary enzymes. They come from the salivary glands and they start to chemically digest food in your mouth. So let's look at some of the structures in your mouth. First of all, there is the tongue. The tongue helps in mechanical processing. It does that by compressing or distorting the food that's in your mouth. It also helps to, it assists in chewing by manipulating the food to get into the right position for chewing. And it also has a sensory analysis function where it analyzes the texture of food, the temperature of food and drink, and it also has taste receptors so it can analyze taste. Then there are salivary glands. Salivary glands include three glands: the parotid glands, the sublingual glands, and the submandibular glands. These glands produce 1 to 1.5 liters of saliva each day. The saliva helps to keep the oral cavities flushed. That kind of helps to take away bacteria that might be building up inside the mouth. Bacterial populations are going to multiply if you have less saliva. So any medications or in elderly people, they have decreased salivary secretions. They're actually going to have a higher bacterial population count, and that's going to make them susceptible to dental caries or cavities. Each of the salivary glands produces a slightly different kind of saliva. The parotid glands are the ones that secrete a salivary amylase. This salivary amylase breaks down carbohydrates. The other two, the sublingual and the submandibular glands, They have fewer enzymes, but they have more buffers and mucus. The mucus helps to make the food more slippery as it goes down through your throat and your esophagus, and the buffers help to make the food less acidic. So here's a picture of the salivary glands. I wanted to show you what those look like, where they're at. You'll be seeing a model or this picture on your lab exam. So this is the parotid gland right there. That is the one that swells up when a person has the mumps. And then here's the sublingual gland that's underneath the tongue. And then right here we have the submandibular gland that's underneath the mandible. Also in the oral cavity are the teeth. These are accessory structures that are necessary for chewing. Another name for chewing is called mastication. This mastication breaks down tough connective tissues and plant fibers of the food that you ingest. And then it helps to saturate those materials with the lubricants and the enzymes from the saliva. The teeth are covered by an enamel. Enamel is a form of calcium phosphate. It is the hardest biologically produced substance in the body, and it covers the teeth. The bulk of the tooth is made of a substance called dentin, so that's underneath the enamel. And this is a mineralized matrix that's similar to bone, but unlike bone, there are no living cells in the dentin. So here's a diagram showing the structure of the tooth, and this is a diagram that would be in your lab exam. You can see the white part of the tooth. This is called the enamel, and it is the hardest biological substance in your body. And then the bulk of the tooth is made up of this dentin. So this is pretty close to bone material, but it doesn't have live cells in it. Inside the dentin, we have this pulp cavity. And the pulp cavity then stretches down into the root. So then we can see the root canal. And there's a portion of the tooth that's above the gum line. So this line right here, you can see the flesh, the mucous membrane that lines the mouth. That's where the neck of the tooth would be. And then anything above the tooth that's seen above, that you can see above the gums, that's called the crown. And then anything that's below the gums, that's below the neck, is called the root. So surrounding the dentin above the gums is the enamel, and then surrounding the dentin below the gums is this cement. And we can see that. We can see a little layer here, right here. And that's in between the dentin and the bone. And then there's also this ligament here. So this right in here, from here to here, that all is the periodontal ligament, and that keeps the tooth nice and tight against the bone, so there should be no movement in the bone. Here's the different types of teeth, and so this also can be in your lab exam. We have the incisors. So the incisors are your front teeth. They're very blade-like. Then we have the canines. The canines are on the sides of the incisors. And then right behind the canines, we have the premolars. And now we can see the crown of the tooth is starting to get a little bit more flat and wider. And then at the very back of the mouth, we have the molars. So this is showing a set of adult teeth. So here we can see all of the adult teeth. And we see that, first of all, we look at the incisors, and you can see that there's 2 central incisors on the top, and then 2 lateral incisors on the top. And then on the bottom, there's 2 central and 2 lateral incisors on the bottom. On either side of the incisors are the canines. So there's 1 canine on the right on the top and 1 on the left on the top. And then on the bottom, we can also see the canines down there. There's 1 just lateral to the incisors on the right, and then 1 lateral on the left. So there's 4 total in canines. Just behind that then we have the premolars. So there's a couple of different sets of premolars. They're on the top and they're on the bottom. And so there's 2 just behind those canines. And then finally we have the molars. And so there's 3 sets of molars. There's 3 on the right on the top, and on the left on the top, and then there's 3 on the bottom on the right, 3 on the bottom on the left. All in total, all in, an adult has 32 teeth. Now we can see that some of the teeth are called third molars, and they come in when a person turns 17 to 21 years old. Those are known as the wisdom teeth. So some of those will be removed depending on what the orthodontist or the dentist determines, if it's pushing up and pushing into the other teeth and crowding them together. So all of these adult teeth you're not born with. Instead, they're going to come in at different ages. So the first ones that come in are the lower central incisors when you're 6 to 7, and then your lateral incisors come in on the bottom, and then on the top we see the incisors start to come in, and the other teeth will just start to come in as a person gets older. So we have the premolars, they'll come in, and then we have the molars after that, and then the molars will come in until the full set of 32 teeth are present. So this is showing the baby teeth, and another name for a baby tooth is called a deciduous tooth. Deciduous is like a tree that has leaves on it that fall off in the fall, so these teeth are going to fall out. So, and even then, a baby, when a baby's born, a baby's not born with teeth. They just start to come in at a certain age. Here's the average age at which we see these teeth start to come in. So first of all, the bottom central incisors come in around 6 months, and then the lateral incisors at 7 months, and then the central incisors on the top come in at 7.5, and then the lateral incisors on the top come in at 9 months. So they're going to come in first, and after that then we see the canines start to come in, and then we see the molars come in after that. And then these teeth that we saw when we were looking at the adult teeth, they're going to fall out because the adult teeth start to push them out. Here's a picture where we see a skull with the maxilla and the mandible, and you can see the unerupted teeth being exposed. So these teeth down here, they have not yet pushed out of the gum. And so all these teeth on the top here, these are all baby teeth up here. So you see baby teeth, and eventually these adult teeth are going to push those baby teeth out.